So I'm going to get started. So, yeah, what I'm going to do is basically just go over the UI. It's going to start off fairly basic and then maybe get a little more advanced once we get into the create page, which we can hang out in for a little while. Then afterwards and during, you guys can just ask me questions. So there can never be a QA. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if I'm not like being clear or you have any questions, because otherwise I'm just going to keep talking for the next, I don't know, however long it goes. Alright, anyways, so this is the device right here, which I'm sure a lot of you already know. So on the left we have 5 macro knobs and 5 macro buttons. They just modify the simulation in various ways. The important thing to know about these buttons and the knobs is that they change their functionality based on where you are in the UI. And like we'll see in a second, there are 3 different UIs, and they kind of behave in different ways and for different purposes. So yeah, these control like numerical parameters. These generally tend to turn on and off like LFOs, but it can all be remapped, and they can definitely do different things depending on what you have configured and that kind of stuff. But they're set up to some basic defaults. This next control right here, this yellow knob, is a cursor control, and it's basically used for like preset loading and selection. Underneath of that is a shift button. It's a blue button, and it basically does 2 different things. One more thing to know about these macro knobs and buttons is that there are, or can be, multiple pages of them. And this button right here temporarily shifts these to the next bank. So right now this is doing this. If I hold this down, it's now going to have a different control. So it just gives access to another collection of controls. Another thing to know about these knobs is that these knobs are buttons. So you can just tap them, and you actually hold it down, you see a little context menu kind of comes up here, but the default is reset. So you just tap and it kind of resets, which is useful because sometimes they can get into like degenerate states. So you just tap it and it's back to something normal. So yeah, oops. So this is a shift button. It shifts these controls to the next page, and it also, there's often little actions you can take down here, and in various locations it adds another collection of actions, and I'll show you that in a second. It's going to have a little arrow that shows you that there's more there. Underneath that is a navigation button. You hold that down, and a collection of navigation bookmarks, navigation links kind of shows right here. So anywhere you are in the UI, you press shift and home, it'll take you back to here. Anywhere you're on the UI, or nav and home, the nav and settings similarly takes you to the settings page. The other thing this does is it lets you bookmark pages. I'm not going to get into that in any detail, but basically the idea is you can go to places in the UI, and if you're going there a lot, then you bookmark them. They're already set up to some bookmarks. This one lets you change images and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's the basic physical controls right here. On the touchpad, we see, first of all, a quadrant breakdown. These are 3 various UIs, and this is for configuring inputs and outputs, and that's actually where we're going to go first, because I think what people are going to want to do first is the simplest thing you can do with this that's cool is get music into it and basically make it an interactive screensaver. So you can see right here, so basically what I have plugged in, I have video out, I have power in, and then I have an audio in cable that's coming from my phone, and this should play some music. Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm not going to keep it on with, well, alright, so hopefully it's, yeah. Anyways, we're back on the, we're on the IO configurator widget. And the most important thing to know about getting music and audio into here is that you need to get the levels right. So basically what you want to do is get your input source on its side as high as possible. The idea is to get the peak kind of a little bit past this bar right there. In the most recent update, there's a little more text that makes it a little more explanatory. And if you can't get that right, then there's a gain control that can help you too, but that should be a last resort. But basically, if you have, this will let you verify that you're getting audio into the device. Another thing to know, it's a little hard to see. Oh, actually, I'm going to switch the view real quick because we don't really need these buttons anymore. I'm going to kind of focus on the LCD panel. So this might take a second. Let's go a little lower. This camera is kind of having some issues focusing, so after I do things, it kind of phases out, but it tends to be good afterwards, so just give me a second to set it up right, and then we should be good. Yeah, see, that should be pretty legible. All right, so you see there's also an output selector right here. There's a jack on the back that lets you split the audio into, or that lets you just route the audio out so you don't need to split it, but you can also send it out through HDMI, which is what I have doing right now, or what I have it doing right now. Anyways, the reason I came in here is to show you that you definitely just need to make sure you get those levels right. And then what you do, you can go into play. A lot of these, so this is the play mode. The basic purpose is for screwing around. You don't really need to think about it too much. This is where the screensaver lives, and yeah, it has a couple other features that are useful. One of the most useful features is that if you load a patch and it doesn't have audio mapped into it, it will randomly do something interesting with the audio. So this should be your first sign that audio is working. You see it's now like it's using like the frequencies to kind of modulate some color stuff there. But you can basically do that with any patch here. So you basically just have like a nice music interactive screensaver at this point. And yeah, you can go in here and just kind of mess around with the controls. Again, in the play mode, the idea is you don't really need to understand what's going on. You just kind of screw around and like, if you find something that you like, you can hit, so first of all, there's a little arrow right there that means that there are additional actions to be taken. So if you hold down shift, it gets another page of actions. So if you're ever doing something that you like, you just press save, and it'll come up with a little save window where you can save the patch and pull it back up later. You can also just sit here and press random until something cool happens. It normally doesn't take very long. And a lot of times you're not that far from something cool when you press random, just with some of the default controls you have here. Well, let's just try some existing patches. All right, anyways, one of the, so there's also a screensaver right here. You just turn on the screensaver and plug in music, and it'll just create new patches on the fly. It's actually probably my favorite thing to do is just to plug in music and turn the screensaver on, then kind of twiddle with some of the controls every time, or when I just kind of want to tweak things a little bit. It's definitely a pretty awesome screensaver in my opinion. So this is a touch screen. You can swipe with it. You can also use this little, so a lot of places in the UI there's a yellow cursor, and this thing controls the cursor. And then you just push the button down and it'll load what's underneath the cursor. And then, yeah, the screensaver is doing this animation on top of what I just loaded. So I'm going to turn off the screensaver. You can also hold down shift and push this button and it'll load the default patch again, which is definitely fairly useful. But anyways, one of the things you might want to do here is kind of go through patches and like find ones that you like. So for instance, if you really like this one, what you can do is you can go to edit and you can add a tag. So that'll give you a way to like filter things. So you just go to add and go to cool. So I just added the cool tag to this. So now I can like restrict the patches that it's showing to the cool ones. So I do that by going to library, hitting tags, and then right here. This might be a little too complicated, but the basic idea is that now only patches that I have like actually actively flagged kind of show up right here. So one of the reasons you might want to do that is if you're having a performance, which is what this perform UI is here for. So now all the patches you have tagged are kind of loaded up here. There's also a live preview in case you can't see the screen. And then there's various other controls. So right now, like I mentioned, a lot of these buttons and knobs change based on where you are. So now these are doing different things. And the idea is that they're kind of doing controls that are more useful in like a live context, like lighting kind of stuff. You can also do this to change the RGB levels. And this stuff is all also remappable, so you can like change that if you want, if you don't like the default controls. This changes how audio reactive it is. Well, it's not super visible at the moment. There's a control right here which turns on the screensaver, which you might want to mess around with in your live set. There's camera controls and all kinds of other stuff. But the basic idea is that this is designed for live performance. You can also swipe on these things right here, and it'll give you additional pages of controls. There's a little cursor right there that kind of shows you what page you're on. Yeah, this is just some Elico controls. Anyways, Now, so that's the basic intro overview. All you really need to know is that plug in music and go to one of these patches on the play mode, and you should have something like interesting and kind of fun to play with. So that's definitely like the getting started kind of thing. The next thing we're gonna get into is this create mode right here, which is definitely significantly more advanced. Actually, I think I might need to turn the screensaver off first. Yeah. So this mode right here is definitely where things get fairly sophisticated. It breaks down all of the patches. First of all, a patch is basically just a saved state. It's something you can recall later. And you change the state by playing with the knobs and the buttons and doing stuff in this little create page. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change instruments. Instrument is definitely a slightly unique concept to this device. It's a graphical algorithm space. It basically lets you create graphics of a certain type in a kind of general way, if that makes any sense. They're not like super general. They all have their unique character, and there's some variation within that you get control over. So there's the new instrument right here. It's called Cat Party. It's the tutorial. So I'm just going to pull that up by tapping on this right here. So first of all, what you see on this page is it's got two main sections. Right here is kind of a library selector, which lets you... I'll stop waving in front of this because it messes up the camera. But anyways, the library selector lets you just basically swap out the top level presets, and then the thing underneath this shows you additional information about what's going on in this top level preset that you have, or patch that you have selected. So right now we only have one patch, so we could just randomly create a new one. Let's just do that. These are pretty strange cat parties. There we go. All right, so then we'll just save that. So now Cat Party 1. So now you see there's multiple of them up here that you can choose from. All right. So the next thing underneath of that is a trinary kind of selector. The first one is modules. The next one is macros, which is what is currently bound to these 5 knobs. And the next one is buttons, which is what's currently bound to these 5 buttons. But because this is a tutorial instrument, there's nothing there at the moment. The idea is I'm going to show you how to actually put stuff there. All right, so right now we're on this patch right here. It's just displaying this cat with some colorization. The idea is that this patch is made up of subcomponents. These subcomponents are called modules in this architecture. And a module is... If you're coming from like Eurorack kind of stuff, you can kind of think of modules in the same kind of parlance. If you're coming from like guitar stuff, a module could be like an effect pedal. But it's basically like a black box that's running some kind of algorithm that has an input and an output, and it has some like parameters that you can control. So this Cat Party instrument is created of 3 submodules. It's the cat, there's the party, and then there's the modulation. The modulation is something that's fairly advanced relative to everything else, so we'll get to that last. But the idea, so you can't really see this on the camera, but when I swap back and forth from these things, the yellow cursor moves from this top row to this thing right here. And now the cursor will let me just cycle through various things here. So I can just cycle and push down, and then it has loaded what I have selected. Yeah. And do the same thing with this other module, so you can load different parties. So you combine a cat, you combine a party, then you get a cat party. So this basically exposes the modular architecture behind how this thing works. So the top level shows you what is currently loaded, or what was currently loaded, and then the next level shows you the modules that kind of compose that. So one of the things to know about modules is that they also have their own information. So if you tap on a module right here, you'll see the little text right here changes to expand. That lets you kind of dive down a level and dive into the cat module and see how that's actually created. And you see now, instead of having the actual top level presets up at the top, now we have the presets for the cat module. And you can kind of see at the top there's a navigation chain, which tells you where you are. So the top level is the instrument cat party, and then now we're in the cat module, and you can just tap back on that to navigate back out there, and then you tap back on here and then expand, and that will dive down again. So it's the same kind of thing where you can just load this, or you can tap on one of these to load, or you can use the cursor and then tap down to load. All right, and then you see the cat module is not made of its own submodules, so this is where it stops. But it does, in fact, have things mapped to these buttons and these knobs. So the cat module exposes 4 different numerical parameters. This one is a X offset, this one's a Y offset, this is a rotation angle, and this is a scale control. All right? So I mentioned before, and buttons, is there anything there? Oh yeah, this actually lets you just cycle through the image here. So I mentioned before that these knobs, oh, one other thing, you can tap on these things right here, and it'll actually give you some information about what that parameter is, its current value. You can actually tap on it to set the value. You can change the sensitivity of the control, and then there's the modulation section, which is definitely pretty advanced. Yeah. Related to that, so I mentioned that you can push down these buttons. So right now I'm pushing down the leftmost button, and you see the menu has just changed. So you do move over to info, and it takes you back to that page I just took you at. So this is a way to get to the information about the parameter. But one other thing you might want to do is set a macro. So this is one of the more complex parts of the application, but it's basically how you do things from inputs to like actions, and by actions I mean set parameter values, like randomize stuff, load stuff. There's all kinds of things you do. But basically, if you're trying to create a macro, the defaults are probably going to work. Although I don't know why channel is not 1. It should be 1. Yeah. And then, all right. So now the navigation menu has changed, so now we're back on the root level, and now you see there's something in the macro. So now we've actually taken one of the parameters from the submodules and exposed it on the root level. So now every time we load a patch, we have exposure to that parameter. So it might be one of the parameters in the instrument that you really like using or is very useful for you, so you make it a macro, so it's available at the base level when you're trying to do things with it. And this is also what gets exposed when it's loaded in the play page and in the perform page. So each one of these, some of the instruments expose a whole lot of parameters, and you don't necessarily need all of them in a live or active performance. So the macro controls are basically what you might want to use easily and readily at a later point. And yeah, the way I created a macro control was by going into the module. There's the cat module, and holding the button down and going to macro, and then choosing the default settings. There's all kinds of stuff you can change, like how fast the knob controls the parameter and all kinds of stuff like that, but I'm not really going to get into it. So another thing you can do, you can set LFOs onto parameters. So we'll go over here and go to animate. All right, and that seems to be a bug, because that should definitely be defaulting to 1. So normally it should, the default control should be at least approximately what you want. So first of all, we can just test out the animation by doing this trigger right here. So now we have animated this Y offset parameter on like a LFO. So I can trigger it again to stop. But basically I'm just going to save it. And now you see in the button selection right here, we've created an LFO, and now this button all the way on the left has control over it. And something to know, the buttons for LFOs can work in 2 ways. They can either be toggle on and off, or they can be temporary. If you hold it down, it'll only go as long until you let go of the button, which I just did, and you can't really see, but that's definitely how it works. And also you can tap on this right here to get back into the controls for the button, so it'll actually let you reconfigure everything and so forth. All right, so that is basically how you set up macros and controls. So there's also the party module, which you can also expand into, and you can see up here again, we're now in cat party/party. It's now down into this module, and you can see right here that this module is basically just a wrapper around an effect module. It has an effect, it has no button controls, and has 1 parameter, and has the effect amount. So I'm turning this control down, and it basically turns on and off this effect. So we basically tap on one of these and you get an effect with an effect amount, or you can just go in here and cycle through the various effects, tap on it, and then yeah, and then you can tap over here and you control the amount, and so forth. So definitely let me know if you guys have any questions about this kind of stuff, because I use this a lot and I don't necessarily have a solid understanding of where people are in this kind of, with respect to this kind of stuff. It makes sense to me, but I can definitely see how it would not make sense to a lot of other people. Alright, well, so now I'm actually going to get into the modulation system, which is definitely probably the most advanced part of the whole Create UI. So, alright, we're going to tap on the modulation module right there. You see this, again, goes to expand. Alright, and now we're going to expand it out. So, you see the modulation widget, the modulation module looks fairly different. It seems to just be creating like patterns, and that's the basic idea, is it creates 4 patterns that you can use in other places in the instrument. And it's definitely the most powerful part of the instrument. It's where a lot of the really interesting effects come from. So there's no parameters or modules here. This modulate module is basically just a wrapper around 4 different pattern generators. All right. So one thing you can also do here, if you press Shift, there's now a little preview button, which basically lets you just view the modulation module, or it lets you view any submodule just on its own. You can take it out of the chain and just basically look at it so you can get some sense of what it's actually doing. It can be very useful for actually wrapping your head around what's happening. So this module right now is generating these 4 patterns that you see right here in these quadrants, and you can use these in various places, which I will show you right now. So you see a couple of them animated, but let's just do the one on the top left. So that one's generating some circles. All right. So, all right, let's go back into create mode. Let's reload cat party 1. All right. Now we're going to go into the party module. So we have this control right here. So first of all, we see the party is basically just a red effect. It basically just turns the pixels underneath of it red. All right. And so this is affecting what's generated by the cat module, if that wasn't obvious. So this effect control right here controls how much of the effect is applied. And you see that when I turn the knob up and down, it's affecting the entire screen uniformly. So this is where the modulation patterns come into play. So you can tap on this right here, and these are the 4 modulation patterns that were generated in that modulation module. If you tap on then it modulates the parameter. All right. So hopefully that's visible, but now instead of affecting the effect amount being uniform over the entire image, it's varying depending on the modulation buffer. So there are 4 different buffers we had, so we can see 4 different variances. So yeah, this one's actually a little bit more visible. It was animated and it had some lines. So now you see the amount of red effect that's applied is variable across the screen. And you can do a lot of crazy stuff with this. You can modulate the modulation patterns by other modulation. It can get really, really advanced and really sophisticated. You can do some weirder stuff here, which might be even more visible. Let's go into the cat module, or let's go to the macro. All right. Let's go. So this was an X control. So it basically just scrolled the entire image left to right. And you see it's scrolling the image uniformly. Like no matter where you are, you get scrolled. So let's just say we want to do something more strange, which is definitely going to happen. So we do this, and now the amount of X offset varies depending on that one modulation pattern. And now, so I'm turning the leftmost knob, which is the X offset control, and now, because it's modulated, it's not actually changing the control, it's changing how much the modulation is applied. So this is maximum modulation, this is minimum modulation, means nothing's happening. And we can, right here, tap on View Mod to actually see the modulation channel that is being affected, or that's being generated. You can go to Preview again and actually see it on its own. So this is a modulation pattern that's being generated in this other like widget structure, and it's modulating that parameter. So stop the preview, and then yeah. So you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. It could definitely start to get a little super weird, but also just awesome, you know? So yeah, let's change the effect. I don't really like this. Oh shit, I messed it up. Let's go back to modulate channel 3. All right. And then we'll go into the party module. Let's just swap it out with this thing. All right, now we're getting somewhere. So I'm gonna go into the cat module and make this angle just start spinning. So there's an animation button right here. And there we go. Now it's spinning way too fast. So I'll go to the rate. And so a lot of places you'll see MSB by numbers. B means beats. It's calculating the BPM of music that's coming in. You can also set it manually. So right now the period of the LFO is set to 8 beats. So now I'm going to set it to 32. And now I'm going to turn it off. And there we go. Now it's going a little bit better. Let's make the range a little bit smaller. I don't know why. Trigger to turn it back off, and then, yeah, now we're turning it back on. Then we can go back and turn the modulation down a little bit. I don't like the cat starts upside down, so I'm going to go into the LFO and change the phase. So there's actually some more controls that are going on over here. So if you press shift, you can get a list of all the modulation that's happening in the patch, and you can also get a list of the LFOs that are live. There's actually a bunch of LFOs that are live that aren't even relevant to the instrument at the moment. So yeah, that's bugged. So I'm going to edit this LFO. This is actually not done. Well, it won't even let me edit the phase. Anyways, let's go back into the parameter. I don't think we can actually edit it live, edit the phase live. Anyways, we have a rotating weird cat. And yeah, so basically, honestly what I like to do is I like to go and just press random until something interesting happens, and then kind of mess around with it until it does something cool. Or I start from something random and then go from there. The random stuff adds LFOs and and modulation, so it actually does some of the more advanced features too. All right, so that's basically, in my opinion, how the create mode works. It's not super straightforward, but it is very, very powerful. I honestly don't know how to make it clear how all this stuff works, given just the amount of stuff that it can do. So if anybody has any suggestions on usability of that, definitely let me know. But what I'm going to do now is go back into the main instrument and play around in there and just like kind of create something from scratch. So yeah, first of all, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is you tap right here, you get to the library page. You can also get this from the Perform and the other widgets, but this is basically for patch management. You can go in here, you can delete patches. You can't delete the default patch, but we can delete the one we just made. Yeah. You can edit patches, edit the tags, you can overwrite them to rename them and stuff like that. This also gives you the filters for the library. And right now, we only have the cat party instrument visible. Come on, focus. All right, but we're going to go into the fractal instrument because that is the cool one. And then yeah, same thing with like tags. These let you select tags that are like, only the tags in this list will be shown. The tags that are in this list won't be shown if you want to like get rid of the factory presets or something. Anyways, back to the create page. So hold down shift and this to load the init patch, but we're on the CAD instrument, so we loaded that. So I'll just tap it to get back to there. All right, so the fractal instrument is created from 4 submodules. You have the seed right here, which is what's creating this red border that I'm moving around. So again, we can tap on this and then use the selector to change that submodule. And this is going to load a patch from the submodule. So instead of having that I don't know what that was. Instead of having that red border, now we have these red lines. So, and as before, you can expand into it. You can also preview it just to see it totally on its own. So now you see what the seed module is, like completely isolated. so yeah, it's basically generating. So this is a recursion simulation. It's basically like if you take a web camera and point it at a TV, it's like an infinite feedback loop, which I'm sure a lot of you are completely familiar with. But the idea, if you have some kind of feedback loop, you need to put something into it, or else it's just going to be like a void. So the seed is basically creating content based on algorithms and images that gets fed into the simulation. Recurse basically lets you bend things around. It controls the opacity of layers getting blended with previous layers and lets you morph the screen based on some geometry. Color basically creates the color. For instance, we can click on a different submodule here, and then now we have a different color palette basically. And all right. For some reason the animation stopped. Ooh. Is it frozen? Or was it just the... It might be OBS, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I don't think this is the device that's freezing. Hopefully I'm not running out of like disk space or something stupid like that, so let me actually check that real quick. No, I've got terabytes. Alright, anyways, hopefully... Oh, come on, man. Don't do this to me. Well, maybe I've reached the maximum file size for recording, so I am going to just reset OBS and then get back into this. Give me a second. Start recording again. Alright, cool. Hopefully you can still see this. Anyways, I'm going to create a patch from scratch in the fractal instrument. Alright. So anyways, I just modified the seed to something random. You can change the post-processing. And then there's the whole modulation system over there, which is, yeah, the thing we just got into. Anyways, we're going to start from scratch, and then we're going to go... What am I going to do? The first thing I'm going to do is going to go into the recurse module and play around with the map. So the recurse module comes with an effect, comes with this blending mode, which actually determines how previous frames are blended together, and exposes a couple of parameters, an amount for the effect, the actual blending constant, and then this thing, which I think I'm going to get rid of. Does it even do anything? I'm not sure. I think it does something, but it's not important. Anyways, up again, we see that we have a preset bank for what is now the recurse module. So it comes with its own collection of presets, and just basically it changes how the screen is bent around. And this is the opacity control right here. So this is actually pretty cool already. So I'm going to go into the map module, and now you see we're down like 2 modules. So we're down a fractal recurse map. And this, do you have us muted? Say what? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Your video stopped.
My video stopped. Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. All right, sorry about that. Oh, it totally did. You're right. So, yeah, I'm going to stop this, and then... Oh, I closed the window. That would actually be obvious. There we go. Is this better?
Yay! Yeah.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, cool. So, yeah, so we just made this patch pretty simply just by going into the recurse module and swapping out a module. So we're going to go into, actually, one of the things to know, in this map module, this is where it starts to get really mathy. So this is where you can play with stuff that can really make things kind of wild and like very fractally. So basically, like, we're iterating like a complex function with a bunch of numerical constants, and this changes a bunch of the constants. That stuff is cool. So check that out. And you can animate a lot of these parameters too. You can't modulate a lot of this stuff because it's 2-dimensional, and that's not really working at the moment. But yeah, it can still be animated. So now we have an interesting map. Let's go back to the root module and just change the seed. So we're going to go into that. We're not going to, we could just go through and like load a new one, but we're going to do something manual by actually expanding into the seed and kind of messing around in there. The seed's a little weird. It's got 4 modules, so it's definitely very general. Well, general might not be the right word. It's very, very powerful. It can do a whole bunch of stuff. So basically, first of all, to get some sense of what the current seed is, you can just go to preview and you can see what it is. The seed preview is distorted, the aspect ratio, but it's not that big of a deal. Anyways, we'll stop the preview. We see it was just creating a border though. So the seed is created from a shape, a texture, an effect, and a couple of other weirder things. And come on. I'm going to need a better camera at some point because this one does not do a good job focusing. Oh, shit. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to go swap out the border. We get a couple of options. Like this is a inner line thing. I'm going to use another border, but one that's laced. So you see now it's got, yeah, just wrapped up. Whoops. So you see right now it's just a red thing, pretty basic. The source determines what's actually getting textured on there. So we have a couple of options. You can use external stuff, you can use a library, and you can do generative stuff. So let's go to the library and just change texture. So we're going to go expand down into this, and now we see with a collection of sources, it exposes all the cameras, and then the image library. So you can go right here and just let's do, that was a cool one, where was it? Here, let's do that. Actually doesn't look good. Let's actually find something that looks good. Actually, no, I think using a texture on whatever's going on right here isn't the best idea, so we're just going to go into the generative stuff. And it comes with its own presets again, so now we're down 4 modules. So there's definitely a bunch of stuff going on there. So let's just click on that. That looks weird. What about this thing? We're getting messages. Oh well. Anyways, that's starting to look kind of interesting. So you see now that we're down 4 modules, there's an interesting feature of the navigation button. If you hold down the navigation button anywhere, it's going to put the basic macro controls on the 5 knobs. So right now, like, the 5 knobs are not mapped to anything, so I'm twirling them and they're not doing anything. There's something mapped to the button, which is to do with this grid, but it's not super important. But this module doesn't expose any parameters, but if we want to get access to the root parameters without actually leaving the module, we can hold down navigation, and now we get access to the same basic controls again. So it can also be useful. I think you can actually do navigation. No, you can't do nav and shift to do that. Anyways, so we've got this right here. So now we're going to go back to the root module. The root module exposes a bunch of LFOs, so let's just start turning some of those on. I'm going to screw around with that again. The transparency control. Zoom in. That is definitely interesting. Alright, now I'm going to mess around with the color. Alright, we can just go in here and change a module. Oh, that looks terrible. That actually looks really interesting. Alright, so we're going to go into this module. We're starting with the submodule post 5. So now we're diving down into the color module, and you can see up here it has the one we just loaded, kind of loaded there. The color module is created from 3 other submodules and has a bunch of parameters. So there's a whole lot of stuff you can do with coloring. So the first thing the coloring does is just a sequence of 2 effects that kind of behave in different ways, but they're basically just to generate the effects. One is the post function, which basically normally is like a palette. It basically palletizes what's coming in, and then the effect just does like a standard kind of effect operation, like invert or swap some colors or something like that. And then after all of that, there's a lighting model. It actually simulates lighting from like computer graphics in a computer graphics way by having like normal vectors and like lights that kind of determine the amount of like illumination of the pixels depending on where you are and what it's doing and that kind of stuff. And there's also a whole bunch of other parameters in this module. A couple of interesting ones which, so you determine the amounts of the effects. There's a global fade control for fading in and out. RGB levels. There's this right here, which is a global pan. I actually didn't know where else to put this, but it's at the end of the processing chain, so it kind of goes here. So you can just kind of pan things around. These are actually really crazy if you modulate them, so let's just do that real quick. See, that's some crazy shit. So you see, right now the modulation is entirely off. In the modulation channel, it's channel 1. It's this circular pattern right here, which we can preview. So now we can kind of see what the modulation pattern is. And we'll go back to where we just were. And now, you can see there's no modulation, so I can turn it up. So now this offset, the amount of the offset is determined by the redness of that pattern I just showed you. So where it was black, there was no offset, whereas red, there is a big offset. So you have it all the way maximum, then it just basically entirely distorts it, but just a little bit of it looks kind of interesting. All right, so we're gonna leave that there, and now we're gonna go play around with like the effects. So first of all, I'm gonna make sure there's actually some amount of the effect. Yeah, let's turn it all the way up just so it's visible. And now let's change it to rainbow. Let's see what happens. That looks terrible. Invert. It's not bad. Scrub, always a favorite. That's not too bad. It's a little gaudy, but let's try to tone it down or something like that. I'm just gonna play around with some controls. That's too much of that. Here's something we can do. So there's this fade control right here, all right? So basically what it does is it's just global turn things off, all right? So I'm gonna wire music into the fade control, all right? We're gonna use modulation channel 4. So I just activated modulation channel 4 onto this parameter. Now I'm gonna go into view mod. And now we're gonna get into the modulation a little bit more. So as you can see, the modulation is just a pattern. They tend to be fairly basic, but they can get more advanced if you actually do that. So basically, it's got a couple of submodules and controls that let you generate this pattern. So this is going to control the frequency of this. It's based on like waves, basically, which two-dimensional waves, which are a little more complicated than your basic collection of one-dimensional waves like sine and cosine. But it's based on all that stuff. So, anyways, this is another one that turns into a zoom. It's kind of controls the amount. I think these let you move it around. So let's put it over here. All right, and then and then turn this down. And this back up. All right. So one of the major components of this modulation pattern is a waveform. All right. So we're going to go into our waveform selector right here. And you see now we have a big library of waveforms. We can go and preview the waveform to actually see what it is. This is just a basic sine wave. But one of the waveforms you have access to in this library is some frequency waves from the audio. So I'm going to go to band wave if I can find it. I just recently redid this stuff, so band wave, there we go. Alright, so check this out. So now I'm going to turn on this audio.
Always rearranging.
Alright, so hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'll try to turn this down. We can go to preview, and now you can actually see the wave that's coming in from the audio. So this is doing just basically like, well, it's actually doing something fairly advanced, but it's based on FFT, if you guys know what that shit is. So it's taking this FFT as a waveform, combining it with this radial pattern, and then it's creating this as the modulation pattern. It's kind of dim, so let's see if I can turn it up. I think that's actually, yeah, in this waveform, I think there's another parameter. which is the band game. Yeah, we'll turn that up. So now we'll go back to here. No, we were in channel 4. Alright, so you can see the modulation pattern is now not doing anything because the music got quiet, but so yeah, it's generating this pattern based on the waveform, and then it's using this pattern again back in the color module on, it was the Z, no, it was on the fade, right? So turn it off, and now back to normal. Add it, and now we have this like nice oscillating responsive music, like kind of field thing. Anyways, so that I think is probably where I'm gonna stop. I can just keep doing this stuff, and I might afterwards, but yeah, I think that's a whole lot of information. So, you guys got any questions? Anything else you want me to mess around with? Any specific things you want me to get into, like modulation, LFOs, like configuration, like all kinds of stuff? So,
Question.
yeah, it's up.
So in the modulation, how could you modulate one shape with another modulation, like two channels modulate each other to get a more complex shape?
Yeah, so I've literally never done that, but I have built it so that you can do it, so we're going to find out. All right, so
Okay.
I'm going to go into this modulation channel right here and just randomize it. All right, let's see what we get. Alright, so now we have a modulation pattern that we just created. That's in modulation channel 2. Alright, now we'll go into modulation channel 1. And you see it has a bunch of parameters. I think that's why I haven't done a lot of it, because there are two-dimensional parameters and can't modulate two-dimensional parameters. But this one you can modulate. So right now, alright, sorry. We're going to use that modulation channel 2 that we just created as one of the parameters in modulation channel 1. So I'm going to do the phase. That was 2. And then I think I have to turn the phase up in order to get that to work. That should be working. Yeah, alright, so this is now something more complicated. So we have a two-dimensional planar waveform, which was the original modulation channel that we had loaded. And that planar waveform has a phase for each point of the wave, and that phase is now being controlled by the other pattern. So now, I think we can even create like a feedback loop, you know? So we can go back into modulation channel 2 and modulate one of its parameters on modulation channel 1. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but it might be weird. Yes, it's weird and not great, so let's not do that. But anyways, you basically go into the parameters of the modulation system and use other modulation patterns to generate that kind of stuff. So another thing to know.
That's cool.
Yeah, it can definitely do some really interesting things. One other thing I guess I didn't touch on. Let me get this other camera here. So the modulation patterns can also be generated by buffers in the system, and by buffers I just mean like images. So let's go into modulation channel 3. All right, I'm going to put it on preview so we can actually see the channel itself. You see right here, so I just plugged in the camera, so you see right here there's a buffer selection. So we can actually go and load external buffer 1, which hopefully should work. All right, and now there's a parameter, the modulation mix. It goes from that geometric pattern to the actual buffer. So I've got a camera, which is now pointed at my desktop. And do I have to turn it up? It's just really dim because it's in a modulation pattern and it's one-dimensional. And let me try this. Let's go with like luminance. Here, that's something. So here, inside of my office. So now we can use this to modulate like something. So for instance, we'll go here. I think that was modulation channel 3. We'll go to this hue offset. And now, I think everything's weird because we have still some modulation on that value on the fade channel. So let's go turn that off. Edit. Yeah. No, that wasn't it. Just wondering why everything's black. Anyways, whatever. Oh, my battery is going to die in like 10 minutes, so yeah, this is going to be ended in a not too distant future. Back in the modulation channels. Where are we? Sorry. Modulation channel 0. Back to the buffer from the camera. You can also use like images and stuff, so now we have camera buffer. Swap it over to this mix, and then let's try this. Yeah, there we go. And now we should be able to use this as a modulation pattern for instance, this. Now you see we have the camera modulating the color of the image. So yeah. Anyways, that is pretty much what the modulation system video. Any other questions? Any other things you want me to get at or dive into more or reiterate about?
Yeah, you said there was a way to do kind of keying with the modulation.
Oh, that's right. I am still intending on getting that in. I think actually in this release, I know I've been saying that for a while. I think I tried to do it the other day and it wasn't working in the way that I wanted to, but I am going to expose
you said
it.
It was in there already, maybe?
Say what? Let's say that again. There wasn't a way to actually select like a color in a reasonable way, but I'm going to expose it as an effect in the seed that will do, I think, exactly what you want. I think I tried to do it and it was looking blocky for some reason.
Yeah, personally, I'm in the Luma King.
I will definitely get that in.
The,
it's fairly straightforward, and I think the way you wanted it was as an effect, so I'll definitely do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'm at the point in the development that I think I still have a list of bugs that need to get fixed, but it's getting, with the most recent release, it should get a lot more stable. But starting this week and over the next couple weeks, I'm working on like the library and the manual, so it's more like device content, and that'll include the Luma Keying effect, because I actually do have some stuff that's really similar to that in here already, if not exactly right, and actually exposing that as an effect should be pretty straightforward.
Nice. Yeah, having like a soft control.
Yeah, it's soft is probably, I would assume that's basically just how fuzzy the cutoff is or something like that. It's probably just going to interpolate from being on and off around the softness, around the threshold with the softness or something like that. Alright, cool. Any other questions? Let's see what actually I have in here. I've got a whole bunch of presets that I've been making that I don't think you guys have yet. These ones were cool. Yeah, in a couple of weeks, you guys will get a whole huge batch of, I think there's only like 200 on your guys' devices from the library, so you'll get like 800 more presets in a couple of weeks. So there's a whole lot more coming. I think it's the easiest to get the presets in. Well, this will work too. Oh shit, my battery's like super. My battery's super dying, so I got time for one question.
However, I did have a hard time kind of following probably half of what you did tonight, but maybe having that manual will help a whole lot. But at least for me, who's somewhat familiar, even just watching you fly through there shows me that I have a tremendous amount of learning to do on the system still.
Yeah, it's not trivial. There's definitely a lot of stuff to get to in that collection. I am really going to focus on like tutorial and manual content and documentation. I've got a friend of mine that's actually going to make tutorial videos. So it's definitely a time investment. There's no doubt about it. But I'm going to try to streamline that as much as possible for people. So. Cool. All right. Well, my laptop is at 3%, so I gotta. Actually, I might have a power cable around here.
Oh no.
Actually, yeah. Give me 20 seconds to find a cable so I can actually plug my laptop in.
Yeah, I wanted to say the modulation stuff was cool too. I haven't really done that yet. Modulating a parameter, getting kind of deeper patterns out of it.
Yeah, the modulation stuff is definitely like what gives the device, I think, the largest amount of its character. It really is definitely one of the major things that this system does that is interesting and novel. Sorry, I'm looking for power cables. We'll try to keep talking. Anyways, I'm just gonna stop this video, then use that jack.